Welcome to Gatsby Chapter 1. Now, I'm going to go through Chapter 1 and kind of hit the high points. Chapter 1, we're introducing all the characters and the setting and all that good stuff, so it's a little loaded, so bear with me. This video is going to be a little longer than the other ones are going to be, but we need to set the groundwork for the rest of the novel. So when we start out, it's important to know that Nick Carraway is our narrator. He is talking to us all the time. There are points where he says what's going on, there are points where he tells us what he's thinking, and then there's points where he's directly talking to us. You have to remember that we are only getting his point of view, and when we have a narrator who is just one person, we have to remember that things might be a little skewed based on the way they see things. We also have to remember Nick Carraway, he's from the Midwest. He's from the Midwest and he has moved to New York City after college. Now, he starts with this little memory from his younger years when his father told him, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, you have to remember that most people did not have the advantages that you had. And basically what he means there is someone might act the way they act because they didn't grow up the same way. They didn't grow up with the money. They didn't grow up in the same environment. So there has to be something called tolerance. And he talks about tolerance a little bit, and he says, I've spent my whole life tolerating everything because of what his father told him. And this creates in him almost a fly on the wall effect where people feel like they should tell him everything and they let him in on all their deep, dark secrets. They let him hang around, and he's kind of like the third wheel that is accepted, but no one feels that he is judging them. And he goes on about that for a little bit, and then he starts with, after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. The events of this book that he's about to tell us are what brings him to the decision that tolerance has a limit. He says, the way you act might be founded on the worst possible conditions, but there's a certain point where people have to realize that you have to move on from that. And he says after a certain point, he doesn't care what your character's founded on. Now, he backtracks just a little bit. He says he's lost all tolerance for people and the way they act, except for one person. And this person is Gatsby. So Gatsby is the one person that he still has tolerance for. Now, when I say tolerance, I mean for their maybe bad behavior, the way they behave. You're going to see a lot of selfishness, a lot of carelessness in this book. So just keep that in mind. So he talks about that a lot. He talks about his family. He came from a well-to-do family. He is not extravagantly rich like the people we're going to meet, but he is well off, well enough off that his father can pay for him to move to New York, pay the rent on a house that comes with a housekeeper. It's a small house, but it's still a house, and for him to try becoming a bondsman. So he's not extravagantly rich, but his family is well off. So we talk about his family a little bit. They owned hardware stores. He talks about where he lives. He had a dog. The dog ran away. Then he talks about how he is kind of lonely. So imagine you pick up everything and you move to New York City and you don't know a single person there. You don't have any family there and you just kind of move there. Now what? And that's kind of where he is. And the moment that makes him feel almost like a New Yorker, almost like he fits in, is when someone asks him, how do you get to West Egg Village? And that makes him feel more like a local. Someone assumes that he's from there, that he knows his way around. So now he's like, oh, I fit in a little more. Now, he talks about how he needs to read and get up on finances and all that. And then he talks about where his house is. His house is in West Egg, which is the new money area. And it's literally between two mansions. It's mansion, big giant mansion, tiny little bungalow house, which is Nick's, big giant mansion. Now it's beachfront. All these houses are going to be on the beach, literally. They are huge, ginormous, so it's a beautiful little house that's nestled between two mansions. He talks about the eggs, how East Egg is old money and West Egg is new money. He then talks about how his cousin, Daisy Buchanan, and Tom, her husband, live in East Egg. And he is going to go over to visit them. So that's where he's talking about Daisy and Tom. Okay, so he goes to visit Daisy and Tom. He talks about their house. It's huge. Their gardens are to the nines, decked out. It's acres and acres of fresh green lawn and greenery. And when he comes to Daisy's house, he sees Tom Buchanan. And he's going to describe Tom Buchanan to us. Tom Buchanan, think of him as the quarterback who peaked in high school and is still riding that wave. That's kind of how he describes Tom Buchanan to us. He's a very strong person. He has, a big personality and he takes up a lot of space. And he talks about how he has lots of muscles. And he uses that to try to intimidate people and to get ahead. He even goes so far as to tell Nick, this is a nice place I have around here. Well, that's great. How many times do people come to your house and you're like, yeah, look at this nice house I got. It's great. So that's Tom. And he thinks he is above everybody. He thinks that a lot of people don't like Tom because of how egotistical he is, and he doesn't care because he's got a nice place, as he says right here. So he is very concerned with people knowing that he has lots of money. So we have this, and he meets Tom outside, and then we're going to come inside. Now remember, this is the 20s. It's summertime in New York City. There is no air conditioning yet. So you have to remember that windows are going to be open. In the summertime, it's going to be hot. Not the kind of heat we would experience here, but it's still pretty hot. So when Nick enters the house, there are two women there. One of them is Daisy. She is blonde. And he talks about this voice. She has this voice that makes you want to listen to her. It kind of like goes up and down, and she mumbles a little bit to make people lean in to listen to her. It's almost a habit that she adopted and now is just all of a sudden, and she can't get rid of it now. Okay. So we talk about Daisy. Now, the other person there is Jordan Baker. Jordan Baker has dark hair. She's a girl. She is a professional golfer. So remember, Nick's going to have kind of a little summer fling with Jordan Baker. Think of them, they're talking. That's what they're doing. They're talking. So they meet them. He has conversations with Daisy. Now, it's important to remember Daisy usually has small talk. She doesn't really engage in important conversations. She just talks to talk. And you're going to see a lot of small talk happening here. Now, they do have a daughter. Tom and Daisy have a daughter. She's 2 years old. You're going to see her one time. They're going to talk about her maybe 3. And she has a nanny. So just keep that in mind. They do have a daughter. Okay, and then we talk about, this is just small talk. Now, here's something that happens too. Jordan Baker asks Nick where he lives, and he says, "Oh, I live in West Egg." Jordan Baker responds with, "You live in West Egg? I know somebody there." Nick says, "I don't know a single," and she says, "You must know Gatsby." And then Daisy chimes in and says, "Gatsby? What Gatsby?" As if this caught her off guard. Now remember, Gatsby and Daisy, once upon a time, had a relationship. So this response should kind of trigger something in you where you're like, oh, is she still concerned with Gatsby? Is she not? Now we're going to go to dinner. And this is a fancy dinner. There's going to be a lot of small talk until something important happens. Now, when there's small talk at dinner, Tom is going to try to make himself seem really smart. He's also going to show just how racist he can be. And Nick, while he does not outwardly judge people, he inwardly judges people. And he basically says in his brain, which we see, that Tom is an idiot. And he's surprised that Tom even read a book. So just keep that in mind. Daisy and Tom kind of pick at each other a little bit. More small talk. And then something happens. The phone rings in the middle of dinner, and a butler comes and tells Tom that the phone is for him. And so Tom goes and answers the phone. And Daisy starts to act a little weird. And think of like when something bad is happening, but you're trying to like put on a good face for your family at Christmas or something. That's kind of the vibe we have here. So we continue the small talk. And then, let's see. Then Daisy gets up. So Tom is gone on the phone. Daisy acts weird for a second. And then she excuses herself from the table. Now, Nick starts to try and talk to Miss Baker, Jordan Baker. But she says, shh. And she's trying to listen to what's going on. And Nick's kind of naive to the whole situation right now. And she even says, don't talk, I want to hear what's happening. And Nick's confused, and Jordan Baker says, oh, you don't know? I thought everybody knew. And then she comes out with it, and apparently everybody does know, even Daisy. Tom's got some woman in New York. So Tom is blatantly cheating on Daisy, and Daisy knows this. Miss Jordan Baker even says she might have the decency not to telephone at dinner time. Now this also shows us that Jordan Baker likes to be nosy, likes to be messy, and get into people's business. They come back to the table, they have this odd little conversation, and then the phone rings again, but no one answers it this time. So after dinner, Daisy and Tom go out for a walk and have a talk. And Daisy, what we're going to see here is Daisy is very self-absorbed and likes the attention to be on her. She accuses Nick of not coming to her wedding. Nick says, well, I was at the war. And then she says, he tries to talk to her about her daughter, and and most people who have babies, they'll talk all day about their kids. And then she brings it back to herself. And she brings it back to the day that her daughter was born. And she says she's very cynical about things. And she says, She was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where, probably with some other woman. I woke up out of the other with an utterly abandoned feeling and asked the nurse if it was a boy or a girl. They didn't have the technology to tell back then. She told me it was a girl, and I turned my head away and wept. All right, I said, I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. Now, this line is very important because you have to understand, if a girl is beautiful, like Daisy, she'll get a husband, she'll marry rich, she'll be fine. But Daisy hopes that she's a fool so that she does not understand all the extra stuff going on, such as a husband cheating on her. Because if Daisy was a fool, she'd be not too naive to understand what Tom was doing. So she hopes her daughter is a beautiful little fool. And then she goes on about how everything's terrible, and she says, and I know I've been everywhere and done everything, and she even calls herself sophisticated. And she kind of goes on and makes it about herself. Then they come back inside and they kind of have some more small talk. Jordan Baker talks about having a tournament. Nick realizes that Jordan Baker is the famous golfer. Daisy says some things about possibly throwing them together. Again, more small talk. Now, when Nick's leaving, they kind of do some more small talk about maybe him being engaged. He's not engaged, but he does have like some fling going on back in the Midwest. Now, where are we at? And right here you can see Nick's inner judgment, which he does not tell people about. He says, I was confused and a little disgusted as I drove away. It seemed to me that the thing for Daisy to do was to rush out of the house, child in arms. But apparently there were no such intentions in her head. As for Tom, the fact that he had some woman in New York was really less surprising than that he had been depressed by a book. So, in two sentences, he has both been disgusted by Daisy. He doesn't understand why she doesn't just leave Tom. And we can come up with lots of ideas about why she wouldn't leave Tom. Also, he says it's not really surprising that Tom has some woman in New York. It's surprising that he was depressed by a book. So he just called Daisy dumb and Tom dumb in the same double-edged sword of a sentence. Now, when he gets back home, remember, he lives next door to Gatsby, who we haven't met yet. And when he gets home, and it's late, he sees Gatsby standing out on the dock by the water. And he's like, oh, well, I'm going to go introduce myself to him. And as soon as he's about to call to him, he sees him start to tremble. It says he's trembling. And he's glancing seaward, so he's looking at the water, and he has one arm stretched out towards the dark water, as if he's reaching towards something, and he's trembling. So what emotions would trembling invoke? Maybe scared, maybe excitement, maybe he's not cold, it's summertime. So there's some big emotion going on there, and Nick decides not to call to Gatsby. And that is where our story ends. So he leaves him alone, and that's the end of chapter 1, not the story. We haven't met Gatsby yet. We've only seen him from afar. So we want to know, who is Gatsby? How's he come into play? What is his role in this story? When do we meet him, etc., etc.? So that's chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Chapter 1 is probably the most boring of the chapters because we're introducing everything, but there's many, many, many more exciting things to come.